We want to welcome you to the Dallas Independent School District STEM Environmental Education Center virtual field trip. We want to say a very special welcome to Thomas Jefferson High School from Dallas ISD and Central from Keller ISD. Teachers, if you are watching and you have not signed up, please do so. Go to www.tiny.cc/high school registration and fill out a little short form. We need the numbers to report them, please. Thank you very much. The program today will be renewable and non-renewable resources. During this virtual field trip, students will discuss the use, conservation of renewable and non-renewable resources as they pertain to sustainability and evaluate the impact of waste management methods such as reduction, reuse, recycling, and composting on resources availability. Students will also compare renewable and non-renewable energy. Mr. Monroe will talk to you about conservation of resources and sustainability. Ms. Schramm, resources from outside an ecosystem. Mr. Dominguez, energy derived from natural and alternative sources. And Ms. Ramirez about waste management. Teachers or students, during this program, you cannot ask us a verbal question, but you can go to www.tiny.cc/question-answer to fill out a short form and send it to us. I will do my best to answer it during the program, and if not, I will send the answer to your teacher, and your teacher can discuss it with you. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Mr. Monroe is going to talk to you about the use and conservation of resources.
Good morning, students. My name is Mr. Monroe, and we're going to be looking into conservation of some of the natural resources that we use in our everyday lives. You know, I've been really concerned. I'm a grandfather, and I'm concerned about what kind of world my grandchildren are going to be adults in. You know, I simply walked over to the faucet a minute ago, and I turned the faucet on, and I was able to fill this glass full of water, drinkable water. And what kind of concerns me is the fact that even in 2007, 1/3 of the world's population was enduring some sort of water scarcity. Now, that's kind of scary to me, because I know since that time, the world population has continually grown or increased. You know, as the world population grows, there's going to be some more scarcities that we're going to be facing in this world. Now, conservation is the magic word. We need to conserve our natural resources. Now, of course, water is a natural renewable resource. There is no new water in the world today, and yet our world population grows. I have a short presentation that I want to show you, a short PowerPoint, and then I'm going to come back and talk about sustainable management, okay? So bear with me while I share my screen with you today, and we'll get into that presentation. Protect your environment. That's what we should all be doing. But I may be wrong in saying this, but there's so many other priorities that we all have in life. A lot of times we're not even thinking about protecting our environment. What happens to the environment affects all living things. Basically, the study of living things in relationship to each other and the environment is called ecology. It helps people to better understand the environment. It teaches people how to protect it. Resources. Natural resources are the substances that are supplied by nature and needed for survival. They include air, water, soil, sun, plants, animals, and fossil fuels such as coal, oil, and natural gas. Many natural resources are limited in supply and cannot be renewed. Pollution is an action or process of making natural resources unsafe or unusable. And we do have a lot of that going on. Smoke and exhaust causes the air to become dirty and harmful to breathe. Waste dumped into waterways harms fish and animals, and nuclear waste can pollute air, water, and soil. The United States Environmental Protection Agency creates laws to protect air, water, and other natural resources. Sustainability. Using a natural resource so that it is not depleted or permanently damaged. Sustainability reduces pollution and helps to keep the environment safe. So conservation and sustainability, it works hand in hand to make sure that the coming generations will have a life, a quality life, in other words. Now, there's a couple of things I want you to kind of understand and maybe grasp as we go through the presentation, and even when I summarize at the end. I want you to remember the three ways that we can kind of conserve our resources. And I want you to be able to see the relationship between conservation and sustainability. You know, to conserve is to save. Now, another effort that is being put forth is using alternative energy sources helps to conserve limited fossil fuels, because we know fossil fuels are not going to be replenished or replaced in a short amount of time. You know, hybrid engines in cars and trucks use much less gas, and we're seeing a lot of the manufacturers come out with their hybrid cars now. Wind turbines can produce electrical power, and I never would have believed it, but up around in my hometown, which is a very small farm community in northwestern Oklahoma, when I went home the last time, I could not believe that in the middle of those wheat fields out there, there were lots of those big wind turbines or wind generators. Using energy from renewable resources such as wind and sun is definitely an alternative energy. Hybrid engines in cars and the wind turbines, as you can see, and those are kind of, I don't know how you would say it. I didn't realize those things was as large as they are until I got close to one. They're huge. Now, to protect our resources, our natural resources, there are the three R's: reusing products, recycling products, reducing waste. We do that, that's going to really help conserve, and it's going to really help sustainability meet its goals. Ways to reuse products. You know, carry a reusable tote bag when shopping. Reuse wrapping paper, plastic bags, and boxes. Give outgrown clothes to others. Use the back sides of paper for totes. Cut up old sheets and towels for cleaning rags. Donate old items to various organizations. Make art projects out of discarded items. You can reduce waste by pre-cycling or buying products that reduce waste. Reading labels to avoid buying hazardous waste material products. Avoiding buying disposable products. Buying refills instead of single packages. We just have to watch what we buy. Now, as far as recycling, turning a used product into a product that can be used. Recycling is one way to dispose of goods and get the most use from them. Paper, plastic, bottles, cans, and scrap metal. You can recycle by participating in recycling programs, buying products from companies that use recycled materials and practice recycling, buying environmentally friendly products, contacting companies that generate a lot of waste to ask about their recycling policies. Give examples of how you protect natural resources by reusing products and reducing waste and recycling. That's one thing I want you guys to kind of talk about. Now, I'm going to stop right there because I'm going to run out of time here shortly. but I just want to share with you some sustainable management goals. Now, these goals are what sustainability is all about. First of all, to give a better life to every individual, to protect the environment, to use resources no faster than they can be replenished or replaced. Those are several goals of sustainability management. Now I'm going to stop sharing my screen with you. And I want to go back over the 3 ways that you can conserve energy or conserve our resources. Reduce, use less. Reuse, you use it again, or you turn it over to somebody that might get some use out of it, or maybe even change it so that it can be used a different way. And then recycle. You know, I'm going to share this with you, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Gorman. But you know, right here in America, this is hard to believe. We throw out 340 million tons of trash every year. Every year, that's what we're throwing out. And we throw out 2.5 million plastic bottles every hour. We need to do better, don't we? All right, Dr. Gorman, I'm going to turn it back over to you and you students. I hope you have a good rest of the virtual field trip today and a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. And that was a very interesting program, and your support system in the background, she did a good job. And it's a very important message, guys. Nobody can emphasize enough how it's important for you guys to start saving already. Now, I see that going on every day. Some of you are doing a great job of it. Some of you, like me, need to improve sometimes. And we did have a question. What is conservation? Conservation is the protection of things found in nature. It requires the sensible use of all of Earth's natural resources, water, soil, minerals, wildlife, and forest. People who care about conservation try to preserve natural resources so they will still be around in the future for you guys. And now Ms. Schramm is going to talk to you about identifying resources that come from outside an ecosystem.
Good morning, everybody. It's Ms. Schramm. And like Dr. Gorman said, we're talking about resources that come from outside of an ecosystem. So we're talking about, again, renewable and non-renewable resources. So at the end of my section, you'll be able to identify both those resources that must come from outside of an ecosystem, such as food, water, lumber, and energy. Okay. So first, we'll go over non-renewable resources. So, whoops. Hold on, guys. I skipped like a million slides. All right, here we go. Now we're cooking on the right burner. Okay, so first we're going to talk about natural resources. So these are the materials or things that people use from the earth. And there's 2 types, which we've heard from Mr. Monroe. So there's renewable, we've got that on the left, and non-renewable on the right. So renewable resources are resources because, they're renewable because they can grow again or they'll never run out. So examples of that are wind, like you saw those wind turbines, solar energy, like the solar panels, hydro, so water, and there's biomass. So that includes like wood, wheat, things you can grow, and geothermal, that's heat from the earth. Those are all renewable resources because they can grow again or they'll never run out. The sun is going to keep burning. The earth is still going to be hot inside, and we can always grow more plants. Now, the non-renewable resources are non-renewable because they can run out or they could be used up. So a lot of times these are resources that come from the ground. So these are the less environmentally friendly to use because we can run out of them. So oil, coal, natural gas, and nuclear energy. So what do you do when your area or your ecosystem doesn't have enough of those natural resources to go around? So we have to import from other areas of the country or other countries. So sometimes we might need to import lumber, coal, and food. Like when you go in the grocery store in the winter, you know that the fruit is not growing outside because it's too cold. So our environment is not able to produce all those things year round. So we have to buy from other countries. So when you go to the grocery store, if you look at the fruits and veggies, you can see on the stickers or the labels where your food is coming from. So a lot of times our fruits and veggies are coming from Mexico, especially as we get into the colder months. You might see that the types of fruits and veggies that are available change over the season. So some might be out of season, or they might start, instead of sourcing them locally, source from like other countries, like I said, like in Mexico. Then our lumber, some areas do not grow a lot of trees, so you'll have to buy from another area. And Texas, while we do have a lot of natural resources and we export a lot of natural resources, we even sometimes have to import coal from other nearby states like Oklahoma and Louisiana. Now, we also export a lot. So other areas that need our natural resources that we have, we sell to them. So we buy and import goods and natural resources, and we also sell or send out natural resources. So I've got this little graph on the left, and that shows all of our agricultural resources that we send out. So we mostly sell cattle. We also sell cotton, milk, broilers, that's broiler chickens. And there's eggs, fruits, veggies, wheat, corn, and other things. So, and then of course we have oil. We sell a lot of oil. That's a big, big, big export for Texas. So while we're kind of looking at these two slides, I want you to think, what of these items are renewable and what aren't? So remember, the renewable are things that we can grow again, and the non-renewable are things that are going to run out or come from the ground. So coal is non-renewable. We import that, but it will run out eventually. Then we have lumber, which you can grow again. It takes a long time, but you can grow lumber again. And fruits and veggies, of course, you can grow again. Then here we've got cotton, which we can grow every year. Cattle, you can grow more, raise them. Chickens as well. So those are renewable. And then our oil is non-renewable because that's coming from the ground and it can run out. So what do you do to take care of your natural resources? So Mr. Monroe talked about this with you already, but reducing, reusing, and recycling. So for reducing, something that I like to do is I've told myself that I'm not buying any more single-use plastics. So those forks and straws and plastic bags, water bottles, all those things, single-use plastics produce a lot of waste. So I try never to buy those on my own. And it's really hard because if you even look in your breakfast or your school lunch, there's a lot of single-use plastic that goes into waste. And right now you're kids, so you don't have much say in what you buy or what your family buys. But just keep that in mind as you get older. What kind of things do you want to buy? I mean, you could have reusable water bottles. You could just use regular silverware and wash it. So there's things that you can do as you get older and be thinking about, how do you want to live better? And reusing, like Mr. Monroe said, hand-me-downs, sharing things, like creating something new out of something old. And then recycling. So recycling, I mean, some things are easier to recycle than not. So not all plastics, not all papers, not everything gets recycled that you try to recycle. So once again, when you're consuming things and you're buying things, you've got to think about, is this renewable? Is this not renewable? Are they even going to be able to recycle this, or is it just going to go in a dump? All right. So I've got some more ideas on reducing, reusing, and recycling. I'm not going to read all that to you. If you want to pause it and read this part of a little article I found, that's great. Otherwise, I think between Mr. Monroe and I, we've given you a lot of ideas on how to conserve those resources. So I'm going to send you back, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your field trip and the rest of your day.
What resources often come from outside an ecosystem? A question sent in by a student. Biotic natural resources include fossil fuels such as coal and petroleum, which are formed from organic matter that has decayed and is not part of the current ecosystem. However, we do use it a lot. And now, Mr. Dominguez is going to talk to us about energy derived from natural and alternative resources.
Hey guys, I'm out here at our beautiful Environmental Science Center, and I am currently outside in a very sunny day. And today we are going to be talking about energy sources, both natural and alternative energy sources. So as you can see, we can't escape the grasp of energy need. But I'm going to discuss some of the ways that we can better our energy consumption and find sources of energy like the sun that are natural and very abundant to meet our energy needs. So I hope you guys learn a little something about what energy sources we use on an everyday basis, and maybe help out our environment and become better consumers of energy. All right, guys, let's review what renewable and non-renewable resources are, because we do need to understand where most of our energy comes from and why we need to shift our thinking into other sources of energy that are more sustainable. So renewable resources, unfortunately, are not where most of our energy comes from. Renewable resources are an energy source that cannot be depleted and are able to supply a continuous source of clean energy. So biomass energy such as ethanol, hydropower, geothermal power, wind energy, and solar energy are examples of renewable resources. However, that is not where most of our energy comes from. So our energy comes from non-renewable resources, or most of it does. So non-renewable energy resources include coal, natural gas, oil, and nuclear energy. So once these resources are used up, they cannot be replaced, which is a major problem for humanity, as we are currently dependent on them to supply most of our energy needs. And it's also worth mentioning that these non-renewable resources are not clean energy. These sources of energy create a lot of pollution. So the conversation on energy should be focused on two things, in my opinion, and that's the problem of pollution and the fact that we are eventually going to run out of non-renewable resources. All right, guys, we're going to start off with a demonstration, and we are going to simulate what greenhouse gases do to our global temperature. For those of you that don't know, greenhouse gases are the gases that are a byproduct of burning fossil fuels, those natural non-renewable resources that we were just talking about. And we're going to do so by setting up two systems. So we're going to have two containers. Each container is going to have water, the same amount of water, and an ice cube. However, one of the systems is going to have the presence of a greenhouse gas, or we're going to simulate the presence of greenhouse gases by adding some carbon dioxide into one of the systems, simply by adding an antacid tablet. Those create carbon dioxide when dropped into water, and we're going to see which ice cube melts first. The one the system that has its ice cube melt first is obviously going to be the one that trapped in more heat. So let's get started. You guys can try this at home. It's a very simple experiment. You just need some containers. If you don't have a top, you can saran wrap the top You're going to need some antacid tablets, some water, and some ice cubes, and a source of heat. Now, to keep this fair, I've placed the same type of heat bulb on each of these lamps, and I've placed them an equal distance from each of the containers. So it should be a fair trial, but of course science tells us that we should do this over and over again. So what I'm going to do off camera is I'm also going to switch these around to make sure that all of the variables are consistent and that I'm getting the same result. If I'm not, there may be something wrong, or I may be wrong. But let's get started with our demonstration. All right, guys, before we move on to talking about other alternative sources of energy besides the non-renewable natural sources of energy that we have been depending on for a while now, I just wanted to mention or put out a disclaimer on the experiment that you guys just saw. And even though the results were pretty clear. The system with the carbon dioxide, that system had its ice cube melt first. I just wanted to make sure that you guys knew that when I was conducting the demonstration, one of my light bulbs went out, so I had to adjust the experiment to just use one light bulb. But I also wanted to mention that, well, an observation that that I found pretty interesting. So one of the ice cubes started drifting closer to the heat source, and it was the system without the carbon dioxide. So I was afraid that that was going to show you an ice cube melting quicker because it was drifting closer to the heat source. But even then, the system with the carbon dioxide had its ice cube melt first, even though that ice cube was further away from the heat source. So I thought that was pretty interesting that even though the system without the carbon dioxide had its ice cube drift very close to the heat source, that even then that ice cube took longer to melt when compared to the system with the carbon dioxide. But that is a variable that we may have to adjust later on, or that I may have to adjust in the future. Now let's go talk about alternative resources of energy. And by the way, these are also natural sources of energy. They are just alternative, referring to sources such as solar, wind, things that we don't normally use or are too common. So I hope that you've gotten a better understanding of what greenhouse gases do to our planet in terms of heat retention. And remember, those greenhouse gases are a direct byproduct of burning fossil fuels, those non-renewable sources of energy. Now, how do we start curbing those negative side effects? Well, we start using alternative sources of energy. And one of my favorite sources, alternative sources of energy, is solar energy. And I've listed some of the benefits here. So it reduces air pollution, right? It makes sense because the less fossil fuels you burn, the less pollution you put out into the air. It reduces water usage. So a lot of people don't think about how much water goes into refining oil, or even in hydroelectric power, you have to divert water in order to create energy. So it would reduce water usage, which is also a resource that we need to be careful with. It improves human health. Well, if you have less pollution in your air, in your water, in your food, your body is going to be healthier. And finally, it helps fight climate change. So we've been getting a lot of extreme weather, and there is a consensus among scientists that it is a direct product of human meddling or human activities such as the burning of fossil fuels. So I hope that you guys have a healthy discussion about alternative sources of energy in your classroom. And thank you guys for coming to this portion of your virtual field trip. I will see you guys next time.
Thank you, Mr. Dominguez. We did have a question. What energy is generated from natural sources? Primary energy sources take many forms, including nuclear energy and fossil energy, like oil, coal, and natural gas, and renewable sources of like wind, solar, geothermal, and hydropower. Thank you again, Mr. Dominguez. And now, Ms. Ramirez, we're going to talk to you about waste management methods.
Hello, my name is Ms. Ramirez, and in this segment, we're going to be looking at methods for waste management. Now, we already heard a lot about recycling and reduction and reusing materials, so I'm going to show you a couple of recycled items, and then we'll jump into our presentation. So one of the waste management methods is, of course, recycling. And I'm going to show you some examples of some products that have been recycled and turned into something new. So here I have this brick. See if you guys can kind of guess what this is made out of and what it's used for. And I'll give you guys a hint. This is often found on a playground. And these are actually shoes. So these are actually the soles of rubber shoes that have been recycled into the soft padding that you might see on a children's playground at school. And so another example of this is Nike has a reuse a shoe program. So those shoes are actually being recycled, and that rubber is being used to create that soft padding at playgrounds. And it's also being recycled to create the soles of their shoes. And this one is an example of the Nike regrind, where they're just reusing the rubber to create new shoes or new products. Another example is something easy that you guys can do to reduce your waste is if you like to drink coffee or tea or other drinks, to use reusable cups instead of having the styrofoam or the paper. So that's another something easy. Something else is to simply repurpose things. So this purse is actually made out of the soda tab tops. So this person has turned trash into a form of art or fashion that people can use. Another example is if you guys do a lot of shopping, or if your parents go buy groceries, instead of using the plastic bags, maybe use a reusable tote. And this tote happens to be made out of about 30 plastic bottles, and all of the leather and the canvas is actually recycled. So again, you can turn some of these old used things into something new. Another example would be my dogs love playing with their dog toys. This one is actually made out of recycled water bottles, and the inside is just a crushed water bottle, so those crinkle dog toys. So there are different ways that we can reuse our materials. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll take a look at some other examples. So let me get that screen share started, and we'll look at some other examples of waste management. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to answer these two questions. The first is, what is recycling? And why is it not the best alternative for reducing waste overall? And the second is, what are two methods of waste management? So some of the examples of waste management that we're going to be going over today, we'll be looking at landfills, incineration, composting, and recycling. So in this little slide here, you can see that the total US municipal solid waste was about 262.4 million tons. So that's a lot of waste. And so we're going to be discussing what happens to our waste after we throw it in the trash. So the first thing that can happen is the US actually has what are called waste incinerators. And it's also known as the combustion of municipal solid waste. So municipal solid waste is the waste from households and businesses. So think about all the things that you throw away every day. And an incinerator is sort of like a confined and controlled burning known as combustion, and it decreases the volume of solid waste for landfills, but we can actually use that burning to recover energy from the waste burning process. So when they utilize these waste incinerators, they can also generate a renewable energy source and decrease carbon emissions by offsetting the need for the use of those fossil fuels. It also decreases the methane from landfills. So as I go through each of these different waste management methods, be thinking about the advantages and the disadvantages to these waste management methods. So waste incinerators, they can have a positive in the sense that we are using it as a form of energy, but they can also have negatives as well. And currently, this is not the most common way that the US gets rid of waste. So it is not very common. There's actually less than 100 incinerators in the US. Most of them are going to be in the Northeast US. So if you look at this map over here, you'll see most of them are going to be in the Northeast. And that's because those areas are more heavily populated. Further on over here, especially in Texas, there's just so much land, and it's just a lot cheaper to have a landfill than it is to create and build these waste incineration plants. And these waste incineration plants, they take in about 94,000 metric tons of solid waste per day. And just to give you an idea of how much energy they produce, listen to this. So a typical waste to energy plant generates about 550 kilowatt hours of energy per ton. That's not a lot. So at an average price of 4 cents per kilowatt hour, revenues per ton of solid waste are only about $20 to $30. So they're not very economical. And this, of course, is information from the EPA website. So that's one of the reasons why they're not heavily used in the US. They cost too much, landfills are cheaper, and land is readily available, especially here in Texas. Plus, another disadvantage is not all the waste is simply burned. You do have leftover stuff that's not going to be completely destroyed. Plus, there's a lot of hazardous waste, and a lot of these plants are not separating that hazardous waste from everything else. It's just all getting burned at once. So things like batteries, paints, chemicals, and cleaners, when they do get burned, those chemicals and those bad things are being released into the air as air pollutants. So there are some negative impacts of these waste incinerators. But again, it's not a very common method here in the US. Very common method, though, that we have are landfills. And I don't know if you've ever been to the Dallas dump, but it is a magnificent sight to see. It's essentially, a landfill is essentially where trash is dumped with thousands of tons of other trash, and then it's covered with soil. Landfills provide a place to store trash, but it doesn't necessarily disappear. So my questions for you guys are, where will trash go when we fill up these landfills? And then second, what would happen if it were to rain and that rainwater washed through a landfill and leached chemicals? How would that impact the surrounding waterways? And from this infographic, you can see that the average person produces about almost 5 pounds of waste per person per day in the US. So that's actually quite high compared to other countries. So think about, why is that? Now, when we think about landfills, decomposers do help break down the biodegradable stuff. Think of things like paper or some things that are have more natural materials to them. But the decomposers can't break down hard things like plastics, and those things can last thousands of years in a landfill. Now, again, we said that municipal solid waste is the waste that's produced by households and businesses, and that's about 250 million tons a year. And here's an interesting statistic for you guys. That is enough to fill a convoy of garbage trucks that would stretch around the world 6 times. So that is a lot of waste. Now, most of the waste from the US is coming from the manufacturers, mining, and agriculture. In landfills, the good news is that they are strictly regulated and that they mostly have monitoring systems to help measure and store leachate. And if you look at this little diagram here on the bottom, leachate is simply when it rains, that rainwater will pass through that solid waste and it'll extract those harmful particles from the waste, and it can enter our groundwater. But there's a lot of precautions that have to be taken into place when creating landfills to help prevent contamination. The next thing that we're going to talk about is something that the other teachers mentioned prior, is recycling. And you can look at the slide to get some quick stats on recycling. But in the US, about 94 million tons of municipal waste actually gets recycled, and that's a good thing. So recycling is one way that we can reduce our carbon footprint. It is very recommended that we try and repurpose products. So something easy that you guys can do, instead of buying new clothes, maybe go to the thrift store or buy clothes that are lightly or gently used. You can also donate your clothing instead of throwing it in the trash. You can actually turn trash into treasure. So a lot of people will actually take unused things. For example, in this little picture here, we have some plastic bags that have been turned into a cute little basket. So try and find ways of giving your trash a second chance, and think of ways how you can reuse it and turn it into something new. The next one we're going to take a look at is composting and vermicomposting. So this is a great way to get rid of things like yard waste and food waste. So a lot of food gets thrown out and wasted. So one thing that you guys can do is create a compost pile in your backyard. Just have a place designated where you can throw your food scraps or your yard waste. In my room, I have a vermicompost. So it's simply a black tub where I have red worms. And when I have leftover food, like you see here in this video, I just chunk it in the vermicompost, and then those worms will help to break it down. And in return, I can actually use that decomposed matter as worm castings to put inside my gardens and my plants. It's very fertile stuff. So that's another way. Instead of throwing your leftover food in the garbage, you can compost it and turn it into something useful. And again, all you need for the vermicompost, you just need a box to put your worms in, or you can go the easy route and just designate a little spot in your backyard to put your food waste in. And then here's an example of what those worm castings look like. Instead of buying it from the nursery, you can actually have the worms create it for you as they're breaking down your food waste. And then in my next slide, this is the important fact for you guys. Reducing what you use and buy has the greatest impact on waste reduction. So yes, recycling is great, but the biggest impact comes from simply reducing what you use and buy. And that is like super hard for me because I love to go shopping, and I look at the things I buy and I'm thinking of all the packaging and the wrapping and all that stuff that goes into it. And it's a lot of waste. So some simple things that you guys can do is simply bring your own bag when you guys go shopping, use a reusable water bottle, pack a waste-free lunch. And one of my problems is I don't like to cook, so I eat a whole bunch of like packaged foods like TV dinners and such, and that has a lot of waste. You're thinking about the cardboard carton, you're thinking about the little plastic tray it comes in. So it is interesting to really write down and look about how much waste you're producing each day. Something easy as just using reusable straws. So buying those metal straws, like Ms. Ram said, bringing your own container and utensils, not using those single waste plastics. So there are some simple things that you guys can do to help just reduce your overall waste. And then here's a quick little example of improper waste management. So the Environmental Education Center, our center, has a history that deals with waste management. So in 1993, Dow Tile Company illegally disposed of 30,000 tons of lead contaminated waste into a local gravel pit. To avoid a lengthy jail time, they were actually fined millions of dollars. And as part of their restitution, the judge asked them to create a program to enhance the environment and benefit children of Dallas County. So that $6 million restitution was actually used to create our existing building. So our building was created because of a company that was illegally dumping. And then my challenge, if I can move over to our next slide, my challenge question for you guys is to identify 3 things that you and or your school can do to reduce waste. Also, my second challenge is to see if you can turn trash into treasure. So try and create a piece of art or repurpose a piece of trash and make it useful again. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share. And that is all I have for you guys today for methods of waste management. We're going to give it back to Dr. Gorman to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramirez. That was a very interesting and very useful presentation this morning. You guys need to really listen to what was going on because it's gonna be part of your future. And we want it to be a good future. Now, we did have one question. What are some various methods of waste disposal? This is pretty well covered, but we're gonna give it to you in a little brief feel. Landfills, incineration and combustion, recovery and recycling, plasma gasification, composting, and waste to energy or recovering energy. Thank you again. Now I am going to share my screen. During this virtual field trip, students discuss the use and conservation of renewable and non-renewable resources as they pertain to sustainability and evaluate the impact of waste management methods such as reduction, reuse, recycling, and composting on resource availability. Students also compared renewable and non-renewable energy. Mr. Monroe talked to you about conservation of resources and sustainability. Ms. Ram discussed resources from outside our ecosystem. Mr. Dominguez, energy derived from natural and alternative sources. And Ms. Ramirez talked to you about waste management. Thank you. If you would, teachers, go to www.tiny.cc/HS feedback, fill out a very short evaluation form, send it back to us. You guys have a great rainy afternoon and a great life.